He had taken enormous pleasure in her forgiveness, then shrugged when I had added her further words about being granted his protection. "She has nothing to fear from any man in Dumnonia," he had said. Now he clapped me on the back. "I shall see you in the dawn," he promised, then watched as we filed out from the firelight into the dark. We crossed grassy meadows and newly harvested fields, where no obstacles other than the soaking ground, the dark, and the driving rain impeded us. That rain came from our left, the west, and it seemed relentless, a stinging, pelting, cold rain that trickled inside our jerkins and chilled our bones. At first we bunched together, so that no man would find himself alone in the dark, though even crossing the easy ground we were constantly calling out in low voices to find where our comrades might be. Some men tried to keep hold of a friend's cloak, but spears clashed together, and men tripped, until finally I stopped everyone and formed two files. Every man was ordered to sling his shield on his back, then to hold onto the spear of the man in front. Kavan was at our rear, making sure no one dropped out, while Nimue and I were in the lead. She held my hand, not out of affection, but simply so that we should stay together in the black night. Lunasa seemed like a dream now, swept away not by time, but by Nimue's fierce refusal to acknowledge that our time in the bower had ever happened. Those hours, like our months on the Isle of the Dead, had served their purpose and were now irrelevant. We came to trees. I hesitated, then plunged down a steep muddy bank and into a darkness so engulfing that I despaired of ever taking 50 men through its horrid blackness. But then Nimue began to croon in a low voice, and the sound acted like a beacon to beckon men safely through the stumbling dark. Both spear chains broke, but by following Nimue's voice, we all somehow blundered through the trees to emerge into a meadow on their farther side. We stopped there, while Kavan and I made a tally of the men, and Nimue circled us, hissing spells at the dark. My spirits, dampened by the rain and gloom, sank lower. I thought I had possessed a mental picture of this countryside that lay just north of my men's camp, but our stumbling progress had obliterated that picture. I had no idea where I was, nor where I should go. I thought we had been heading north, but without a star to guide me or moon to light my way, I let my fears overcome my resolve.
"Why are you waiting?"
Nimue came to my side and whispered the words. I said nothing, not willing to admit that I was lost, or perhaps not willing to admit that I was frightened. Nimue sensed my helplessness and took command.
"We have a long stretch of open pasture ahead of us," she told my men. "It used to graze sheep, but they've taken the flock away, so there are no shepherds or dogs to see us. It's uphill all the way, but easy enough going if we stay together. At the end of the pasture, we come to a wood, and there we'll wait for dawn. It isn't far and it isn't difficult. I know we're wet and cold, but tomorrow we shall warm ourselves on our enemies' fires."
She spoke with utter confidence. I do not think I could have led those men through that wet night, but Nimue did. She claimed that her one eye saw in the dark where our eyes could not, and maybe that was true. Or maybe she simply possessed a better idea of this stretch of countryside than I did. But however it was done, she did it well. In the last hour we walked along the shoulder of a hill, and suddenly the going became easier, for we were now on the western height above Lug Vale, and our enemies' watchfires burned in the dark beneath us. I could even see the barricade of felled pine trees, and the glint of the river Lug beyond. In the vale, men threw great balks of wood on the fires to light the road, where attackers might come from the south. We reached the woods and sank onto the wet ground. Some of us half slept in the deceptive, dream-filled, shallow slumber that seems like no sleep at all, and leaves a man cold, weary, and aching. But Nimue stayed awake, muttering charms and talking to men who could not sleep. It was not small talk, for Nimue had no time for idle chatter. but fierce explanations of why we fought. Not for Mordred, she said, but for a Britain shorn of foreigners and of foreign ideas. And even the Christians in my ranks listened to her. I did not wait for the dawn to make my attack. Instead, when the rain-soaked sky showed the first pale glimmer of steely light in the east, I woke the sleepers and led my 50 spearmen down to the wood's edge. We waited there above a grassy slope that fell down to the vale's bed, as steeply as the flanks of Innis Swidrun's tor. My left arm was tight in the shield straps. Howlbane was at my hip, and my heavy spear was gripped in my right hand. A small mist showed where the river flowed out of the vale. A white owl flew low beside our trees, and my men thought the bird an ill omen. But then a wildcat snarled behind us, and Nimue said that the owl's doom-laden appearance had been nullified. I said a prayer to Mithras, giving all the next hours to his glory. Then I told my men that the Franks had been far fiercer enemies than these night-fuddled Powisians in the valley beneath us. I doubted that was entirely true, but men on the edge of battle do not need truth but confidence. I had privately ordered Issa and another man to stay close to Nimue, for if she died, I knew my men's confidence would vanish like a summer mist. The rain spat from behind us, making the grassy slope slick. The sky above the vale's far side lightened further, showing the first shadows among the flying clouds. The world was grey and black, night dark in the vale itself, but lighter on the wood's edge, a contrast that made me fear the enemy could see us, while we could not see him. Their fires still blazed, but much lower than they had during the dark, spirit-haunted depths of night. I could see no sentries. It was time to go. "Move slowly," I ordered my men. I had imagined a mad rush down the hill, but now I changed my mind. The wet grass would be treacherous, and it would be better, I decided, if we crept slow and silent down the slope, like wraiths in the dawn. I led the way, stepping ever more cautiously as the hill became steeper. Even nailed boots gave treacherous holding on wet ground, and so we went as slow as stalking cats, and the loudest noise in the half-dark was the sound of our own breathing. We used spears as staffs. Twice men fell heavily, their shields clattering against scabbards or spears, and both times we all went still and waited for a challenge. None came. The last part of the slope was the steepest, but from the brow of that final descent we could at last see the whole bed of the vale. The river ran like a black shadow on the far side, while beneath us the Roman road passed between a group of thatched huts where the enemy had to be sheltering. I could only see 4 men. 2 were crouching near the fires, a third was sitting under the eaves of a hut, while the 4th paced up and down behind the tree fence. The eastern sky was paling towards the bright flare of dawn, and it was time to release my wolf-tailed spearmen to the slaughter. "The gods be your shield wall," I told them, "and kill well." We hurled ourselves down the last yards of that steep slope. Some men slid down on their backsides rather than try to stay on their feet. Some ran headlong, and I, because I was their leader, ran with them. Fear gave us wings and made us scream our challenge. We were the wolves of Benwick, come to the border hills of Powys to offer death, and suddenly, as ever in battle, the elation took over. The soaring joy flared inside our souls, as all restraint and thought and decency were obliterated, to leave only the feral glare of combat. I leapt down the last few feet, stumbled among raspberry bushes, kicked over an empty pail, then saw the first startled man emerge from a nearby hut. He was in trousers and jerkin, carrying a spear and blinking at the rainy dawn. And thus he died, as I speared him through the belly. I was howling the wolf howl, daring my enemies to come and be killed. My spear stuck in the dying man's guts. I left it there and drew Howlbane. Another man peered from the hut to see what happened, and I lunged at his eyes, throwing him back. My men streamed past me, howling and whooping. The sentries were fleeing. One ran to the river, hesitated, turned back, and died under 2 spear thrusts. One of my men seized a brand from the fire and tossed it onto the wet thatch. More firebrands followed until at last the huts caught fire to drive their inhabitants out to where my spearmen waited. A woman screamed as burning thatch fell on her. Nimue had taken a sword from a dead enemy and was plunging it into the neck of a fallen man. She was keening a weird, high sound that gave the chill dawn a new terror. Cavan bellowed at men to start hauling the tree fence aside. I left the few enemy that still lived to the mercies of my men and went to help him. The fence was a barricade made from 24 felled pines, and each tree needed a score of men to pull aside. We had made a gap 40 feet wide where the road pierced the barricade. Then Issa called a warning to me. The men we had slaughtered had not been the whole guard force in the valley, but rather the PK line, who guarded the fence, and now the main garrison, woken by the commotion, was showing in the shadowy northern part of the valley. "Shield wall!" I called. "Shield wall!" We formed the line just north of the burning cottages. 2 of my men had broken their ankles coming down the steep slope, and a third had been killed in the first moments of the fight. But the rest of us shuffled into line and touched our shield edges together to make certain the wall was tight. I had retrieved my own spear, so now I sheathed Howlbane and pushed my spear point out to join the other steel points that bristled 5 feet ahead of the shield wall. I ordered a half-dozen men to stay behind with Nimue, in case any of the enemy still lay hidden among the shadows. Then we had to wait, while Cavan replaced his shield. The straps of his own had broken, so he picked up a Parwisian shield and swiftly cut away the leather cover with its eagle symbol, then took his place at the right-hand end of the wall. The most vulnerable place, because the right-hand man in a line must hold his shield to protect the man to his left, and thus expose his own right side to enemy thrusts. "Ready, Lord!" he called to me. "Forward!" I shouted. It was better to advance, I thought, than let the enemy form and attack us. The vale's sides grew higher and steeper as we marched north. The slope on our right, beyond the river, was a thick tangle of trees, while to our left the hill was grassy at first, but then turned to scrub. The valley narrowed as we advanced, though it never narrowed sufficiently to be called a gorge. There was room for a warband to manoeuvre in Lug Vale, though the marshy riverbank did help to constrict the dry, level ground needed for battle. The first clouded light was illuminating the western hills, but that light had yet to flood into the valley's depths, where the rain had at last stopped, though the wind gusted cold and damp to flicker the flames of the campfires that burned in the upper vale. Those campfires revealed a thatched village around a Roman building. The shadows of hurrying men flickered in front of the fires. A horse whinnied. Then suddenly, as at last the dawn's ghostly light sifted down to the road, I saw a shield wall forming. I could also see that the shield wall held at least 100 men, and more were hurrying into its ranks. "Hold!" I called to my men, then stared into the bad light and guessed that nearer 200 men were forming the enemy wall. The grey light glinted from their spearheads. This was the elite guard Gorfithid had set to hold the Vale. The Vale was certainly too broad for my 50 men to hold. The road ran close to the western slope and left a wide meadow to our right, where the enemy could easily outflank us, and so I ordered my men back. "Slowly back!" I called. "Slow and sure! Back to the fence!" We could guard the gap we had ripped in the tree fence, though even so it would only be a matter of moments before the enemy clambered over the remaining trees and so surrounded us. "Slowly back!" I called again, then stood still as my men retreated. I waited because a single horseman had ridden out from the enemy ranks and was spurring towards us. The enemy's emissary was a tall man who rode well. He had an iron helmet crested with swan feathers, a lance and sword but no shield. He wore a breastplate, and his saddle was a sheepskin. He was a striking-looking man,